We are back in our forensic workstation and ready to investigate our disk image. So you can see I've opened up the Windows Explorer and I've navigated to our evidence folder on our host system, and in there you should be able to find your Windows disk. So this Windows disk, you can see it's already recognized by Windows. So Windows knows what to do with a VHD. Now we do not want to have that happen. So if we right click on this file, it would possible to mount the VHD as a shared drive onto this system, but this would allow us to have read and write access, and that would modify the evidence, and we definitely want to avoid that at all costs. So there's a couple of solutions out there, especially in the forensic community, where there's some tools that allow us to mount those images and then have access and extract the data that we need from those images. And one of those tools is Arsenal Image Mounter. So if we go back and open up another File Explorer window so we can move into our Tools folder, we had it under C and Tools. So I'm going to also move this under Quick Access because we'll be needing this quite a lot. Same thing for the Cases folder, just something for us to have easier access in the future. So going into Tools, we can see Arsenal Image Mounter. And what this tool can do is obviously mounting images, but with a whole number of features. So for that, let's go and check out their page real quick, because there's a couple things that we need to understand. So we can use it in free mode. That is great. It allows us to do everything we need for this course. We can mount images in different ways and save them, and a couple more things. So that's all we need. There's also a professional mode. When you buy a license, you can actually mount the disk images based off volume shadow copies, which can be really helpful. Or you can even launch a disk image as a virtual machine, which can even bypass user authentication. So very advanced and really nice ways to investigate a system, but something that we don't need at this point. And another thing, now we've talked about VHDs and like virtual hard disk, which is a Microsoft standard. As an image support, we can expect to be able to mount raw disk images, which is essentially a real byte by byte copy of a disk. Or we can also mount advanced forensic format 4 and EnCase images, which is a specific formats to forensic tools. And then down here you can see a bunch of other virtual machine disk file formats that are supported. Now, file system support, this means that we can expect to be able to load NTFS, FAT, and so on. So a couple of file systems, anything here is NTFS, and we'll go deeper into this at a later point. But that's also something that is good to understand so that we know what to expect. Now let's start up Arsenal Image Mounter. At the first start, there's a couple things we need to go through. So once this is loaded, you can see that there is a no license detected screen. So we want to be using the free mode, that's okay. And then it wants to install a SCSI driver, and we can click yes. We can see the driver was successfully installed. So click OK and open up Arsenal Image Mounter. So once we're in there, now one thing we can do right away, you can see here, mount disk image. There's a couple of options that are grayed out. So those are either professional version features or not available at this point. One thing that we can also see here, BitLocker. We can mount BitLocker encrypted images with this tool, which is one of the few ones that are out there. So this is really helpful, but we won't need it for our purposes. Now, if we click File and we go ahead and mount a disk image file, we can now navigate to our host systems shared folder, into the evidence folder, and then from there we can select our VHD. And when we do so, we have a couple of options on how we want to mount it. Now, it's really important to understand what read does and what write does and how we can get around changing or modifying the original disk image. So you can see read-only. We can mount it just as read-only disk device. There's a couple of things we won't be able to write onto the disk, and that might limit our purposes for the forensic analysis. So we still need write access, but we don't want to change the disk in any way. So that's where the second option comes into play. We can mount this disk image as a writable disk. However, Arsenal has a write filter, which means modifications will only be written into a temporary differencing file and it will not be applied to the image itself. And this is a great way that allows us to interact with the disk in any way that we need it to. So the differencing file can be either stored in a different location or deleted automatically once we are done, or just even remain within the RAM or the memory. So we don't need to keep the file. We can just say store differencing data in host RAM only and mount it as write temporary. Now, a couple options down here even. We can write to the original file, absolutely something we, in this case, want to avoid. So if we click OK, just take a couple of seconds. So this is now saying the new virtual disk was mounted in read-only mode by Windows, but it's actually writable because of the Arsenal magic. So say yes, we want to make it writable. And then do we want to take it online? Say yes. Here we have our disk image mounted, and you can see a few things. Mount point is E, so we should see it as an E drive. We see that disk size is 40 gigabytes. So that's the allocated space of the virtual machine that we created earlier. And then we have write temporary. So this confirms we are not writing or changing the original disk. We can now go back to our Windows Explorer, and we should see that there is an E drive. It's called Windows 10. And here we can see this is the folder structure of the root of the disk that we acquired from the target system. So these folders should look familiar, and it's the basic Windows structure, including the Atomic Red Team folder that was installed. So that looks great. And one more thing that we wanna look at is there's a Windows disk utility tool called Disk Manager. So if you just type it into the start, we can see here that an overview of the disks and the logical drives that are attached to this system. And besides disk 0, which contains the C drive, we can see there's disk 1 and Windows E. So this confirms the power of Arsenal Image Mounter, which is now even through a shared folder where we're able to mount the disk image, and it appears as a physical drive to the operating system. All right, so let's close out this window and we can go ahead and investigate the contents of this image.